Last week we finished up on omniscience, and I believe that's where we ended up. But angels, they're superhuman in knowledge. They know a whole lot more than we do. But it's because of two things. Number one, God has told them and instructed them. And secondly, they see things differently than we do. We live in a fallen world, so we're kind of in this bubble, and we don't see a lot of things as problematic that are going on around us, where they, understanding heaven and understanding God's will, and understanding that spiritual realm with the fallen angels, the demons, all those things, they look and see things a little bit differently. And I don't know how much sympathy they have for us. I don't really know. I know God has a great sympathy for us. God loves us, has compassion for us. These angels, to do what they do, the good angels, the ones who are ministers to us, to be able to do that, they must see things in a very different perspective. And to read some of the accounts, especially of Gabriel, how he interacts with Daniel, how he interacts with Zacharias and Mary, and all through the scriptures, wherever he's mentioned, he's there, he's got this job to do. And I don't know. I think if there were more human qualities there with the angels, they'd be like saying, "What's the matter with these stupid people? Just can't they get it?
Amen.
I see it. Can't they get it?" And but they don't. They're what we need to be, in the sense that they are continually just encouraging, do the will of God. Just do what God says, and that's what they do. And so they are superhuman knowledge, but they're not omniscient. They have to get the information from somewhere. But God, again, knows everything that is knowable. Okay? Knows all the options out there. Knows probably what we will do, but still we have that free will to make choices. So in the same vein, angels are superhuman in strength. And there are examples of this superhuman strength in Genesis chapter 19, verse 11. Remember when you go on back to the previous chapters, and the previous chapter 18, 3 men appear to Abraham, okay, and afterwards he realizes that one is the Lord and the 2 others are angels. But they appear as men, and the Lord tells Abraham what he's going to do down in Sodom, or have done. So the 2 angels, appearing as men, go down there to check out, see if things are as bad as what the outcry has been. And of course we know the story, how that Lot takes them into his house at nighttime. The men of the city are evil. They come around, and they're going to take these 2 men, but these 2 men who are angels smote the men in Sodom. Remember what they did?
They struck them blind.
Blindness, so that they couldn't find the door. They were just walking around. Well, it's only fitting, right? If they're going to be blind spiritually, they may as well be blind physically for a little while. But there's a protection that is there. So all these people, and Lot had a reason to be afraid, but the 2 angels protected him. In 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 15 through 17, an angel destroyed by pestilence, or using pestilence, from Dan to Beersheba, 70,000 men. There's a problem that occurred. And I believe this is the one with David, where David had commanded a count of the men of military age Now, there were several times you read of such a count being done, but it was usually God saying to the king, count your men, see who you've got, because I've got something for you to do. This time the Lord didn't say to do it. David just did it on himself, took it upon himself, and God was upset and sent this angel to destroy people, cause this pestilence. Now Dan was clear up in the northern extremity of the promised land, and Beersheba was the furthest south. So this angel's coming through and destroys 70,000 men. Because, and if my account's right, it's because of what David had done. And we'll see later about David, how he reacts and gets this to stop. But imagine that. And not only that, think of the book of Exodus. When the angel of death, or they call it the death angel, the angel of death, but an angel came through and killed the firstborn of all the Egyptians and any of the Hebrews that didn't have the blood on the doorpost, didn't do the Passover ceremony properly. So you have all these different examples in the scriptures. An angel of the Lord smote 185,000 men of valor. They were leaders and they were captives. 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 35 to 36, 2 Chronicles 32:21. Didn't matter that they were leaders, didn't matter that they were warriors, didn't matter that they were captains. Destroyed them. Whatever reason, see, God makes a judgment. These angels follow through with it. Now we might gain a little better of appreciation for when we see in the scriptures that angels often appear as warriors. Now, in that context, it's much the same as what we go through today, because we're at a period of time in our country, have been since the 1960s, where military people, policemen, and such are denigrated. There are people out here who hate them for whatever reason. But we see these angels doing this, and remember what angels are. They're to minister to us. So what are they doing? Whatever it is, whatever the reasons behind this type of a deal, this type of a destruction, God's doing that for good people. For good people. And that's hard to imagine. How could this be good? Well, somebody's going to learn a lesson from this. Hopefully we learn a lesson from it, not to depart from God's word and God's ways, but that next generation coming up needed to learn something also. So, an angel appearing as a warrior, that type of a person we should see as a servant for us. Policemen, what? To protect and serve is usually what they have. Do you know what the word sheriff means? Where it comes from? What the roots of that word are? Or the root is? Have you ever looked at it? Okay. And it's strange because in the English language we say sheriff. In its original language, where it came from, it's Sharif. Sharif. You know who Omar Sharif, the actor, okay? He's got that name. But back in the Middle East, they had a Sharif. And he was in charge of keeping peace within a particular area. Much like the tribal feudalistic system that they have going on over there today. That's why it's so tough in Afghanistan. You know, it's not one united country, it's how many thousands of different little tribes, and each have their own area, and each have their person, sharif or whatever they call them there, who makes sure that there's order within that community, within that area. And that passed in through, I believe, Spain and then into England, where that local sheriff, the sheriff of Nottingham, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're evil, right? We don't dismiss that, but there's that sheriff. He's supposed to be the peacekeeper in that area. Amazing. The English language, how we pick up stuff from all over the place. You know, all different types of languages, bring it in and use it, you know, retread it a little bit and stick it out there. So that's what, you know, the county sheriff is supposed to do. He's supposed to be a peacekeeper within the community. So again, angels. What would be one of their ministering duties? To keep the peace somewhere, anywhere that God sends them, to protect and serve us as ministering spirits that they are. Okay? Daniel in the lion's den, Daniel chapter 6 and verse 22. Daniel's thrown in the lion's den. The king didn't want to do it, did he? Didn't want to do it. He was sorry he had to do it, but he had made the law, and he had to follow the law that he made. So he throws him in there and he says, I hope that your God can save you. And he goes out the next morning, isn't it? And looks in and, are you okay, Daniel? Yes, the Lord stopped the mouths of the lions, but there's an angel that the Lord has sent. And the Lord ministers to Daniel in this, the angel ministers to Daniel in this way. Do we have, we don't have the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but we should have, because they're, you know, how many did we throw into the fiery furnace? Well, 3. Well, I see someone else down there, and he looks like Son of Man, something like that. But there's that protection somehow that comes, even in something as terrible as that. But superhuman strength, the ability to withstand those things and to help protect people and to serve and to save. Save in a physical sense. Okay?
Where is that Shadrach, Meshach story? Where is it in the Bible? I forget.
I think it would be in Daniel like 3 or 4. I think it's before Daniel in the lion's den.
I couldn't remember.
In Matthew 28, verses 2 through 4, an angel rolled away the 4,000-pound stone from the tomb. I don't know how they know it's a 4,000-pound stone. Like I say, this study, somebody else did it. I just picked it up to use as the basis for the study. But we know from archaeologists what these things looked like. So it probably was a 2-ton stone. It took several men to be able, and what they would do is when they would cut a tomb out of the rock, they would have this big stone that would cover over the face, and they'd put it on a little, not so much an incline, but like a step up. And they put it there so that when they put the body in that tomb, all they had to do was kind of roll that stone off of the incline. Now, that would be a challenge in itself, but how do you get that back up onto that step? See what I'm saying? That would be a tremendous thing, but the Bible tells us that an angel rolled that stone away. Now, the angel didn't roll the stone away so that Jesus could get out. Remember that? The angel rolled the stone away so people could get in and see that the tomb was empty. Any questions on on that? No? Okay. F, an angel brought the apostles out of a dungeon in Acts chapter 5 and verse 19. Remember, the apostles, some have been arrested for preaching the gospel. They've been brought before the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin had them thrown in the dungeon, and they told them, you know, this because you've preached the gospel. So the next day, they send for them. They're going to release them, and the person goes down to get them. They're not there because an angel had let them out. And they had gone back to the other 120 or however many there were at that time, Christians. And that next morning they came out and there they were, preaching in the temple again. The thing they'd been arrested for the day before, they're back to doing it. How much, you know, an angel allowing this to happen, them experiencing the protection of an angel, knowing that God's hand is in this, how much more would they be strengthened, these disciples, these apostles, to go out and to continue the work. This is God's will. This is what we need to be doing. So there are jailers, there are guards, down, whatever. But nothing was too strong that the angel could not overcome it for them and do it in a miraculous way. All right. Let's go to H first. An angel entered a prison, led Peter out as though nothing had been in the way. Acts chapter 12, verse 10. And Peter, again, had been arrested. Now this is after John the Lesser had been murdered by Herod. You know, there were two apostles named John. One was John that we read about, that wrote the Gospel according to John and 3 letters in the book of Revelation. But there was another John, John the Lesser, some call him. He had been killed for preaching the gospel. When Herod saw that the Jews liked that, well, he had Peter arrested, thrown in prison, and he was bound with 2 chains and made to sleep between 2 soldiers, and watchmen were placed before the doors of Herod's prison and secured by iron gates, bolts, bars, locks, and doors. So an angel entered the prison and led Peter out, though nothing had been in the way. And there in verse 10, as Peter's coming out, the angel's leading him out, this iron gate that's heavy and locked, secured, of its own accord just opens up. And Peter walks out. And Peter's able to go back to the upper room where the rest of the apostles, or rest of the disciples are. But again, a prison that for all intents and purposes is strong enough to keep people in. This angel was able to do whatever he needed to do to have Peter released. And then, go back to G, an angel smote King Herod. Now this is not Herod the Great. Somebody asked a question, I think, yeah. And I believe Herod the Great died in what we would call 2 BC. All right? And I know it's strange, but when they did the numbers, there was a miscalculation, and before it was made official through the Catholic Church, the guy who did it found his mistake and went and said, hey, you know, I made this mistake. It's about 6 years. And they said, we're not going through that again. We'll just leave it as it is. So Jesus was born about what we would call 6 BC. And Herod died at 2 BC. Jesus died 4 years old, I believe, at that time. So when you really look at it, his death being in AD 30, he was about 36 years old when he was crucified. But so you got that 30-year period of history. You have when Herod dies, his kingdom is split between 4 of his children, Philip and another Herod, like Herod Archelaus, and you know, a couple others.
Were they all kin, or just
they're all kind of related in there, but when you read of John the Baptizer telling Herod he couldn't have that woman Herodias, all right, because that was his brother's sister, or brother's wife. Okay, Philip was in charge of an area up on the northeast side of what we call Palestine or Israel, Judea back then. But this other Herod was he was like the more important of all of them. But Philip was the one who was over here. So you can read about it there in the scriptures about, you know, what's going on between this family. Now he dies, and then Herod Antipas, Herod Archelaus, and then Herod Antipas, and I believe this is Herod Antipas, who would be like a grandson of Herod, who's killed. And remember, what happens to him is, again, he had put John in prison, or killed John the Lesser, and then had Peter put in prison, but he went over to a land, I think it was Tyre, but he delivered a speech there, and when he delivered the speech, he was dressed in gold, like a gold outfit. And so, you know, the sun was shining and it was reflecting off of him, and he spoke real well, but they had this deal worked up. Hey, when Herod speaks, you know, just give him some glory, you know, build him up, because we want to use him to have more control over this area. You know, we want him on our side. So they praised him. Oh, that's not the voice of a man, that's a voice of God. And instead of him saying, as well, he was supposed to be a Jew. I think I've talked about how that the Herods were Idumeans, forced to be Jews. Caesar had appointed Herod over that area. So they weren't really Jews, but they kind of accepted Judaism to a degree so that they could be rulers. So instead of him saying, no, that's not the voice of, I'm just a man, he accepted that praise. And that's when this angel smote him, and smote him with worms, parasites, okay, so that he was eaten from the inside. A very terrible, horrible death. But the angel brought this on because he allowed the people to honor him as a god. Any questions on that? And these are a few examples to show this superhuman strength of angels. And, well, you know what? Oh, more. Yeah, let me do these 2 passages and we'll end up for the day. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. Whereas angels, though greater in might and power, do not pronounce a blasphemous judgment against them before the Lord. Okay? And I think that's speaking about the fallen angels. Okay? We hear the saying, you know, don't speak evil of the dead. And so we don't speak evil of the dead, but we make fun of demons. How do we make fun of Satan, say? How do we make fun of Satan?
What being a Christian?
No, how do we make fun?
Yeah, just dressing in red and have
Horns,
horns and
pitchfork.
a tail with a pointed tail and
Red
a pitchfork.
Pitchfork. Yeah, all that stuff. We make a comic book character out of him, so what do people think? Well, he's just something somebody made up. Satan is a very powerful being. And for real. And when we make fun, say, of Satan, then we might lead somebody else not to understand the danger that Satan would present. Same way with these demons, right? Now, I don't believe that demons have the ability to come in and possess bodies today. I think that was done away with when, you know, after the initial period of the church coming into existence, in the end of inspiration. But yet, they exist. They're out there. They're somewhere in between heaven and earth, bottomless pit, the abyss, whatever you want, and they still have some type of spiritual influence today. Not a physical influence, but a spiritual influence. So, hey, don't make fun of them. Don't make fun of them. Don't make fun of people who believe in demons. Now, they may be wrong in what they say about demons, but demons do exist. So we've got to be very careful. But again, whereas angels, though greater in might and power, do not pronounce a blasphemous judgment against them before the Lord. Psalm 103 verse 20, bless the Lord, O you his angels, you mighty ones who do his word, obeying the voice of his word. So the mighty ones, these angels are mighty ones, and you know what? That's that word Elohim, I believe, again. Elohim, in the beginning, you know, Elohim, in the beginning, created the heavens and earth. That's the mighty ones, but in context, and that's why you've got to really be careful with the Bible as you read it and as you study it. Make sure you're following context. In that context, it's God, because God is creating. Here, it's mighty ones, and they can be Elohim, but they're not creators. They're created beings, but they are powerful, and they're superhuman in strength, superhuman in knowledge. And in a couple of weeks, we'll look at how they are superhuman in speed. So, we'll look next week then. While they are superhuman in power, they're not omnipotent as God is. All right? Thank you for your time. Sorry, it took a couple minutes more. That got us to a good break point. Thank you.
Yeah, she came flying in when I went out.
And I threw her back out.
Oh, you threw her back out.
Like, why are you and your sister not? I went outside, she was shouting up at you now and baby back in. I said, let me grab your sister so you guys can supper together.
You know, much of mental illness is considered to be demons in our day and time.
Back and stop praying. I said,
Yes,
"You may be
addictions.
but you ain't scared of that."
And people say, oh, you know, I'm facing my
How you doing?
demons.
Why she was drunk
And
open? And I said,
it's-
yeah, she was.
it's one
She
way
got
to
in
put
before I knew she
the-
was there. Oh.
Put the burden on something other
Yeah,
than
Jamie said,
me
said
and the
you
choices
left
that I
it
make.
open or something.
She does.
I've seen things
Oh, yeah.
that I thought, if this is, you know, this has got to be pretty close to what somebody being controlled by a demon.
I'm not sure where your crotch was.
Yeah.
It's scary, but still it isn't the same thing.
Well,
but it gets over.
Right. The distinction that I'm able to draw from that is where the demon entered the herd of pigs and they went off the cliff. We don't have demons roaming around from this to that to the other
No.
in this day and time, to the best of our knowledge.
Well, I believe Zechariah,
Yeah, how you woke up and wife.
the last chapter of Zechariah, the first couple of verses, or maybe it's the next to the last, talks about a fountain of blood opened up for sin, and the unclean spirits are removed from the land. And I think that's when God takes them, or the angel, Michael, if you look in the book of Revelation, puts them in this bottomless pit and throws a golden chain over it.
Yeah.
But then it says, and they're gonna stay there, but in the last time, they'll be released for a little season. But we wouldn't, how would we know it?
They didn't know
How would we really know it? That's what it
They had
is.
some stuff like that.